It is November 1st, 2024, and Iran is now vowing a response after Israel carried out a targeted attack last weekend. Now, while Iranian officials have noted that this attack left limited damage on Iranian military sites, that doesn't change the fact that Israel is openly targeting Iran in a number of ways. Although, if you ask the Associated Press here in the West, they say that this is Israel's first open, right, public attack against Iran. But we know that Israel's attacks involving targeted assassinations and a number of other attacks have been present for years now. So to act as though this is the first time that Israel is quote unquote acting out, to act as though Israel is retaliating to Iran's actual retaliatory attack back on October 1st would be disingenuous to what is actually going on. But a lot of questions still remain as to what Iran is going to do, how they are going to retaliate, and of course, the all too important question of when it is going to happen. Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that after Israel's attack on Iran last weekend, Iran has noted that it left limited damage, while Iran's foreign ministry spokesman also said that Tehran will, quote, use all available tools to deliver a definite and effective response to the Zionist regime. What do you think he means by that, and what could that response look like?
For the Iranians, it's not really important that the Israeli regime's attack was not really very successful. What is most important was that this was an act of aggression, and therefore the country has to respond. Because if it does not respond, then that will only encourage the Israeli regime to carry out further strikes. We know that Tel Aviv does not listen to anyone. It's carrying out a genocide in Gaza. This genocide has been going on for over a year. No one has stopped it. So there's no reason to believe that the Israeli regime is going to stop attacking Iran. Therefore, the Iranians believe that the only possible solution is for the regime to be punished so that it will regret attacking Iran and thus establishing deterrence through a strike. Of course, it's possible that the Israelis would respond with another strike, but I think the Iranians have decided that they will continue striking the Israelis until Netanyahu is forced to end this type of aggression.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to watch too. I know that, the last time around, we had this waiting period that went on for weeks, right? Of waiting and wondering, okay, what is Iran going to do? I know a lot of people are looking to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, to see what he has said. He responded to the attack saying that Iranian officials should determine how best to demonstrate Iran's power to Israel, adding that the Israeli attack should neither be downplayed nor exaggerated. Now, how do you see this statement, and does it reflect the limited damage that Israel was able to do in this case?
Yes, it obviously it's clear that the Israelis were not able to do a great deal. Otherwise, we would have seen huge explosions. One of the key areas that was attacked was right beside Tehran, very close to where we live. If there were explosions, we would have seen fire, and we would have heard the sounds here in Tehran, especially to the east of Tehran where we are, but nothing happened. 4 officers were murdered by the Israelis, but they had to do with Iran's air defense systems. And so they did do some damage, obviously, to those systems, or some of them, but by and large, most of the missiles were destroyed in the air. Very little damage was caused. But again, uh, Ayatollah Khamenei, in that speech, what he was saying was that there has to be a response in order to, and deterrence must be established. But he was also saying that the politicians or the political leaders in the country, along with the military, have to sit down and see what sort of response there should be, what type of response there should be, what size, how many missiles or how many drones, let's say, should be used in response to the sort of attack that was carried out. So we'll have to wait and see what the decision is and when the strike will take place. But I think that it's been decided that Iran will strike the Israeli regime directly.
Yeah, and it's interesting too when it comes to the media coverage, especially looking at the way that the Western media has portrayed all of this, because you have the Associated Press describing this as, quote, the first time that Israel's military has openly attacked Iran. Now, we know that Israel has obviously been targeting Iran for a long time with a variety of attacks and assassinations, but how do you see that the way that the Western media has tried to make Israel's attack seem as if it's some sort of larger than life plan, or at the same time, they're acting like Israel was the one retaliating, as if Iran's October 1st retaliation, their actual retaliatory attack, was just some sort of standalone attack against Israel?
Well, that's exactly what Western governments do, and Western media really is almost the same as they say they're almost the same thing as Western governments. So when the Israeli regime bombed the Iranian embassy in Damascus, that was Iranian territory. And when Iran took its complaint to the UN Security Council, the United States, Britain, and France, and Germany, they supported the Israelis. So they supported the airstrike on the Iranian embassy. So obviously, we should not be surprised when Western media pretends that this is really the first attack on Iran. We've had many years of attack. Over the years, we've had many attacks against Iranians by the Israeli regime. We had the Israelis and the Americans carry out the world's first cyber attack on Iran years ago. Then they murdered a number of Iranian scientists. One of them was a colleague of mine at the University of Tehran. He was murdered in front of his wife. Then we had Iranian officers who were fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria during the previous decade, who were murdered by the Israelis who were supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the dirty war in Syria. And more recently, we had the murder of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, who was invited to Iran by the president-elect at that time for his inauguration, and he was murdered in an official government guest house. So if none of these are attacks on Iran, then what does constitute an attack on a country?
Yeah, that's an excellent question there, and I would love to ask the Western media, right? They act like everything just kind of happens in a bubble, like there's no context to really anything that's happening right now. Now, speaking of the Western media coverage, because the New York Times has a new report out this week with the title, How Russia, China, and Iran Are Interfering in the Presidential Election. Because not only is there no context, but they also have to make everything about the US. They claim that Russia favors Donald Trump and Iran favors Kamala Harris. Now, I personally can't think of any reason why Iran would have any favorite candidate in this race, but how do you think that the Iranian government sees the upcoming US presidential election? Do they expect any sort of a change based on whoever is elected?
No. After what the Biden regime has done to Gaza, and after what they've done to Lebanon, there is no way in the world that the Iranians would prefer the status quo in the United States. Although Iran has no expectations, neither Kamala Harris nor Trump are decent human beings. Neither of them care for the Palestinian people. Both of them have supported ethno-supremacism. They've supported the genocide and Holocaust in Gaza. and the slaughter in Lebanon and the lawlessness that the Israeli regime follows, and it's in lawless. It supports lawless behavior across the board. So Iran doesn't support either side, but there's no reason whatsoever to think that after all that has happened over the last year, Iran would in any way support Kamala Harris. That's beyond belief. I don't see how anyone in the West could conclude such a thing.
Yeah, I don't either, right? And I'm looking at this going, okay, that's your assessment. I mean, I understand why they don't support Donald Trump, but it's not as if Harris has been any kind of champion for peace in the Middle East. And speaking of peace, the possibility of any kind of ceasefire, how do you see kind of the timing that we're in right now? I know we've got this election coming up next week here in the US, and it almost seems like there's kind of okay, let's wait to see what the results are. Do you see that as being a legitimate waiting period, or is this just about Israel trying to buy more time, knowing that they're not likely to agree to a ceasefire agreement for either Lebanon or Gaza?
I don't think that there's any serious talk of a ceasefire. Whatever is coming from Western media and Washington is for internal consumption. Biden and Harris want to be seen as trying to put an end to this, but they're simply buying time. They are fully supporting the Israeli regime as we speak. The Israelis are bombing civilian targets in Lebanon. They've murdered a large number of medics today in different parts of Lebanon. It's clear that they're targeting medics, and they are continuing with the genocide in Gaza. The United States and Germany and other countries send weapons and ammunition every day, and there is no reason to believe that this is serious at all.
Yeah, and when it comes to those just massacres and atrocities that Israel is carrying out, as you noted there, I mean, it does seem like on a daily basis, right, we hear more about what they're doing to the people of Lebanon, or just the horrific siege that they are carrying out on northern Gaza, literally trying to starve out hundreds of thousands of Palestinians there. And, I look around and maybe this is just a level of impatience, right? Going, okay, someone needs to do something. How do you view the position that the region is in right now? And how do you think that Iran views it as they're kind of trying to balance all of these things, but still trying to keep the focus on the Palestinians and now the Lebanese civilians that are being targeted?
Well, on the one hand, the Iranians have a responsibility to punish the Israeli regime and to create deterrence. But obviously, the Iranians will do it in a way which helps Gaza and which helps Lebanon. And in addition to that, the Iranians do want to make sure that the global majority, the global South, sees that its response is a response to Israeli aggression, and that it is not Iran that is provoking the other side, and it's not Iran that's pushing the region towards a regional war. It's clear that the only side that wants a regional war is the Israeli regime. The only side that's carrying out genocide is the Israeli regime, and Iran wants to make sure that the focus stays on Israel. And one of the reasons why Iran does or has in the past delayed its response, and so far we've seen a brief delay, at least until now, in before the next response, I think it's because Iran wants to make sure in communications with different governments, through its embassies and through senior officials, that everyone understands that this is a direct response, or Iran's actions are in direct response to Israeli aggression. There is a balancing act here that's being carried out. On the one hand, Iran has to punish them. It has to also help the resistance, both through the punishment, but also through direct assistance. And at the same time, it has to keep the global South well informed about the situation and about the fact that Iran is simply responding to Israeli aggression and is and the response is intended to prevent the regime from carrying out further aggression.
And I think that that's good to keep in mind, and also to look around at the region and to see really the role that Iran is playing. It's one that a number of other countries are, well, I would say, scared to do, but right, they don't want to be in the position that Iran is in right now, of actually wanting to stand up for the civilians that are being targeted by Israel with the help of the US. And I thought it was interesting too. The US Department of Defense put out a statement in which it said that, quote, the Israeli strike in Iran should mark the end of the tit-for-tat between the two nations. And to think that this is just some tit-for-tat battle, right? It's like, oh, Israel and Iran, they're just kind of going back and forth at it again, it's kind of maddening to me, right? Because you're taking away all of the context, the fact that there is an ongoing genocide right now that Israel is carrying out, the fact that Iran is a part of this axis of resistance that is actually pushing for some form of accountability for Israel when so many other countries around the world won't do it. How do you see the position that the international community is playing right now, and even kind of this mindset coming from the US that, oh, okay, it should be done now, right? This back and forth, that should be all there is to it, as if there isn't a lot of other atrocities that Israel is continuing to carry out.
You're absolutely correct. But I think it also reveals something else that is very important. And that is that if the United States and the West, or the Israeli regime, thinks that the Israeli strike on Iran was a success, I don't think the Americans really would want this exchange to end. They would like to see it continue so that the Israeli regime could press its advantage and it could degrade Iran's military capabilities. But the statement actually reveals that the opposite is true. The Israeli regime is unable to harm Iran seriously, to bring about significant damage to Iran's defensive and offensive capabilities, whereas the Iranians have the ability to really cause a lot of pain and suffering for the Israeli regime. So the statement itself, I think, is evidence enough that the Israelis are not doing well in their offensive striking or attempts to strike Iran, and that the Iranians have been very effective in punishing the Israeli regime. And I think that's why the Iranians will definitely punish the Israeli regime again. And one thing that I'd like to also add here, although it's not related to the question, is that for over 4 decades, Iran has been demonized by the Western media, by Western governments, by international institutions controlled by the West, human rights bodies that are controlled by the West, funded by the West. But today, when we look at what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon, we see that the collective West is supporting a Holocaust. They're supporting genocidal strikes by an ethno-supremacist regime that carries out ethnic cleansing and that believes in racial hierarchy and domination. An apartheid state it is as well. Iran is on one side opposing this, the West is on the other side supporting this regime. So my belief is that those people who've been influenced by this narrative for the last 4 decades, or for over 4 decades, should really rethink Iran. Because what does this say about Iran being the lone country that is supporting or leading this axis of resistance, which is in Yemen, in Iraq, and Syria, and Lebanon, and of course in Palestine? And it is, on the other hand, we have the collective West that is supporting the Israeli regime. My argument is that most of that narrative that people are influenced, that has influenced people across the world, that discourse that has caused a lot of skepticism towards Iran in the eyes of, or which has created a lot of skepticism in the minds of many people across the world. People should start questioning them. They should start questioning those narratives, that discourse, that anti-Iranian discourse, And they should think that maybe maybe the opposite is true. What is it about the Islamic Republic of Iran that makes it so adamant in its support for the victims? And what is wrong with the West, which makes it so supportive of racist aggressors?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And yeah, it's like Iran could just as easily say, "No, we're good. We're, yeah, that do what other governments in the region have done and have said, "Oh, yeah, we want to see a ceasefire," but then they kind of leave it at that and don't attempt to take it any further. And as you were talking there, I was thinking about the fact that, here in the US, that's very similar to the treatment of Russia, right? We have this Cold War mentality. The US has taken the steps to decide, okay, these are the bad guys, right? Looking at Russia, looking at Iran, now trying to add China into that as well, which is, of course, why they claim that these are the three countries, the trifecta of election interference. And yet, what we're watching is that these countries that the US has tried to target and isolate, they're not being isolated. The US is becoming the one that is now going to eventually become more isolated because of its own policies, because of the genocide that it's supporting. But I thought it was notable. We had Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov coming out this week and saying that Russia and Iran intend to sign a new treaty soon that will include closer defense cooperation. Lastly, how do you see the position that Iran is in right now as it is strengthening its ties with countries like Russia? It is a member of the BRICS alliance, and it's proving that despite all of the pressure and all of the sanctions from the US, it is not isolated from the rest of the world.
A lot has been said about BRICS over the past few weeks, and I'm sure you've covered this extensively, so I don't want to repeat things that you've already said to your audience. But there's no doubt that the world is changing very fast. The West is increasingly marginalized. They've destroyed their credibility across the world because of their support for this Holocaust in Gaza. Militarily, they failed in Ukraine. They've also failed to isolate Russia. And their economies collectively are going downhill very fast, whereas the global majority or the global South has a very different situation. And Western policies have driven Iran and Russia and other countries closer to each other. Now that Iran and Russia have established such good ties, especially since the war in Ukraine began, it's interesting how many Russians and Iranians are wondering why we didn't do this earlier, why efforts weren't made to push for the establishment of the North-South transport corridor, which makes so much sense. So a lot of this has been brought about because of the West. The West has pushed different countries towards one another and has brought about a new thinking among these countries. They've been exploring new ways to do trade. They've been exploring new ways to do business. And the relationships are evolving very quickly, especially across Asia, which is where the global economy has shifted to. So BRICS is reflective to a large degree, in my opinion, to a very large degree of Western policy. If it wasn't for the policies pursued by the West, weaponizing the dollar, sanctions, using financial institutions as weapons by Western countries, I do not think that we would have had BRICS today. And if we did have BRICS, it would have been just some sort of symbolic organization where a few heads of states would meet every now and then. But BRICS is very serious. It's not going to change the world tomorrow, but it is going to bring about change. And it is, of course, one very important organization alongside other regional organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which are growing, and all of them are excluding the West. Why is it that different regions are excluding the West? Because they all feel that the West is behaving in a manner which is detrimental to their interests. So the West is its own worst enemy. And they get angry about BRICS. They see BRICS as a threat. But in reality, BRICS just wants to have a more fair system. The West wants to control the world. They want to marginalize whoever they don't like. and the rest of the world is getting tired of this. And since the rest of the world today, or much of the rest of the non-Western world, is much more powerful than it was before, and the West has exhausted itself through endless wars and through liberal capitalism, and by supporting genocide, the West is no longer interesting for the rest of us, and we'd rather work without the West to build our countries. And if the West in future changes its policies, obviously everyone would like to have good relations with them, just like they'd like to have good relations with other countries. But for the time being, the West has marginalized itself, and I think it has created this great opportunity for non-Western countries to explore stronger relations, better economic ties, closer political ties, closer cultural ties, and closer academic ties.
Yeah, you can only be the bully for so long before the majority, the rest of the world, kind of wake up and go, wait a second, we don't have to continue living like this. And alliances, exactly as you were saying, like the BRICS alliance, are kind of born out of that realization of, oh, we can all work together and we become stronger than when we allow ourselves to just be isolated by the US because they decided that we're the country that they are going to target at the moment. Certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down the latest here. Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor at the University of Tehran, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you can catch new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also watch Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can participate in regular polls and Q&As and join the community there. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.